A liquid exists that costs $2 to make it home. It transforms gray, cracked, sun-destroyed wood back to the condition it had the day it left the factory. Not with paint that hides damage, not with stain that fades in 6 months. It penetrates the grain itself and rebuilds the wood from the inside out. One coat on a rotting fence, and your neighbors think you replaced every board. One pass on a weathered deck, and the contractor you almost called loses a $1,000 job. Furniture that looked ready for the landfill suddenly looks like it belongs in a showroom. No sanding required, no power tools needed, no experience necessary. This formula has existed since before the Second World War, when craftsmen in the 1930s knew it by heart. Cabinet makers passed it down like a family secret. Then the wood restoration industry figured out something devastating. If homeowners discovered this liquid, they would never call a contractor again. A $2 bottle that replaces a $900 service cannot be allowed to spread, so they buried it. Not because it failed, because it worked too well. The story begins in 1860 when a British inventor named Frederick Walton noticed something strange in his London workshop. A skin had formed on the surface of a can of linseed oil he left open overnight. That rubbery film was harder than varnish and more flexible than lacquer. Walton realized the oil was reacting with oxygen in the air and forming a natural polymer. He spent 3 years perfecting the process in a factory outside London. By 1863, he had invented linoleum, the first mass-produced floor covering in history. It was built entirely on one ingredient, linseed oil, extracted from the seeds of the flax plant. But this oil goes back much further than Victorian England, 20,000 years further. The flax plant is one of the oldest cultivated crops on Earth. It was grown in ancient Mesopotamia for both fiber and seed. Egyptian tombs contain linen cloth woven from flax that is still intact after 4,000 years. The preservation is remarkable. In ancient China, woodworkers discovered that pressing those seeds produced a golden oil. It soaked into timber and hardened over weeks into a protective shield. This was the first wood finish ever recorded in human history. Not polyurethane from a factory, not chemical sealant from a laboratory. Oil from a seed pressed by hand, rubbed into wood with a cloth. That was all it took to protect timber for generations. For centuries across Europe, every cabinet maker, shipbuilder, and furniture maker used linseed oil as the foundation of their craft. Medieval builders mixed it with lead oxide to create boiled linseed oil. This version dried harder and faster than the raw form. Cathedral doors in Germany treated with this oil in the 1500s are still standing today. 500 years of protection from a single application. Then something happened that changed everything. In the 1950s, the petrochemical industry introduced synthetic alkyd resins. Polyurethane, lacquer, and chemical varnishes flooded the market. These products were faster to apply, shinier to look at, and far more profitable to manufacture. Linseed oil cost pennies per gallon to produce. Synthetic finishes cost dollars and required reapplication every 2 to 3 years. The industry did not switch because the new products were better. They switched because the new products generated repeat revenue. The old formula quietly disappeared from hardware store shelves. Within a generation, most people forgot it ever existed. Here is what happens at the molecular level when you apply this liquid to damaged wood. Linseed oil is a triglyceride with an unusually high concentration of alpha-lanolinic acid. That is a polyunsaturated fatty acid that reacts with oxygen through a process scientists call oxidation. The chemistry is simple but powerful. When you rub the oil into wood, it does not sit on the surface like paint or varnish. It penetrates deep into the cellular structure of the timber itself. Once inside, the fatty acid chains begin to cross-link with each other. They form a flexible polymer network that fills every pore. The cross-linking process creates a new material inside the wood fibers, a natural resin that expands and contracts with temperature but repels moisture and resists scratching. Research confirmed that linseed oil penetrates wood up to 4 times deeper than synthetic polyurethane. The difference is not marginal. Polyurethane sits on top of the grain like a plastic shell. One crack in that shell lets moisture rush underneath. That is why polyurethane decks peel, blister, and turn gray within 3 seasons. The protection fails at the first sign of damage. Linseed oil does the opposite because it becomes part of the wood itself. There is no shell to crack. Now add white vinegar to the mixture and something remarkable happens. Vinegar is acetic acid, a natural solvent. It cuts through decades of grime, oxidation, and dead finish without damaging healthy fibers underneath. The cleaning action is immediate and visible. While the vinegar strips away the gray, the linseed oil floods into the freshly exposed grain. It begins polymerizing immediately. The third ingredient is the key that unlocks the entire formula. Turpentine, a natural solvent distilled from pine resin. It thins the linseed oil so it penetrates twice as deep and cures twice as fast. The penetration depth is critical. Without turpentine, the oil pools on the surface and takes weeks to harden. With turpentine, it soaks in within minutes and begins hardening within hours. The total cost of these 3 ingredients at any hardware store is less than $2 per application. The savings are extraordinary. A quart of boiled linseed oil costs about $4. A gallon of white vinegar costs under $3. A small can of turpentine runs about $5 and lasts for months. Now compare that to what a contractor charges for the same result. The average cost to refinish a 200 square foot deck is $980. Labor alone runs between $600 and $1,400 for a job that takes 1 to 3 days. A single piece of antique furniture costs $300 to $800 at a restoration shop. The wood restoration industry generates nearly $2 billion per year in product sales alone. That is the size of the machine profiting from your ignorance. Here is the exact formula. Gather 3 ingredients from any hardware store. 1 part boiled linseed oil, where the can must say boiled on the label. 1 part white distilled vinegar. 1 part turpentine, found in the paint aisle. Combine equal parts of all 3 into a glass jar with a tight lid. Shake vigorously for 30 seconds until the mixture emulsifies into a cloudy golden liquid. Clean the wood surface with a dry brush to remove loose dirt and debris. You do not need to sand, strip, or power wash. Dip a clean cotton rag into the mixture and apply it along the grain of the wood. Use firm, even strokes, working in sections about 2 feet wide. Let the first coat absorb for 10 to 15 minutes, then wipe away any excess with a dry cloth. Wait 24 hours and apply a second coat. One critical safety warning that most channels completely ignore. Rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust if left crumpled in a pile. Always spread your rags flat to dry outdoors or submerge them in water in a sealed metal container before disposing. This is not optional, this is a life safety rule. For a weathered deck, start with the most damaged board so you can see the transformation immediately. The gray oxidized layer will dissolve on contact with the vinegar. The golden oil will flood into the exposed grain within seconds. For indoor furniture, apply with a softer cloth using lighter pressure in small circular motions. A contractor would charge you $600 or more for that same coverage area on a single deck. You just did it for less than $2 in materials, 20 minutes of your time. No appointment, no 2-week wait, no strangers tracking dust through your house. This knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked so well that an entire industry had to pretend it never existed. For 20,000 years, humans protected wood with oil from a seed and acid from fermented grain. No corporations, no brand names, no expensive equipment. Your grandparents knew this formula, or at least their grandparents did. It was written in handwriting on index cards and tucked inside kitchen drawers. Then one generation stopped passing it down because a television commercial told them there was a better way. There was not a better way. There was just a more expensive way. We did not lose this formula. We just stopped looking in the right place where it was always waiting.